The Havoc's mercy sounded like it was always one wrong button away from self-destructing. Every corridor groaned like a constipated whale. Every panel flickered with a ghost of functionality, and the AI, known affectionately among the crew as Murder Grandma, had developed the habit of reading out passive-aggressive life advice at 3 a.m. over the intercom. Lieutenant Van Keller adjusted the straps of his engineering vest and squinted at a hydraulic conduit that had clearly given up on life. "You see," he muttered to the pipe, "this is what happens when you let your existential dread leak into your plasma regulation valves." The pipe, stoic as ever, responded by spraying him with steam. "Noted," he coughed, wiping his goggles. "I'll lower the sarcasm." The maintenance bay was mostly empty, save for a low-humming cleaning drone named Squeeble, who had once tried to vacuum a junior officer's prosthetic leg. Since then, Squeeble had been unofficially demoted to emotional support Roomba, and now followed Van around like a burnt toast-scented puppy. The door hissed open behind him, and suddenly the temperature dropped 15 degrees in attitude alone. Zerixa Veltal didn't walk. She moved like a gravitational certainty, measured, deadly, and fully capable of removing your limbs while lecturing you about posture. She was tall, lean, and terrifying, her armor bristling with weapon nodes and ceremonial scar insignias etched into its plates. In the ears, long, blade-like, twitching subtly as though scanning for any nearby excuse to initiate combat. Her gaze swept the bay like a scanning array configured for disappointment. "Lieutenant Keller," she said, voice like polished stone being ground under boot. "This is a restricted maintenance corridor." "And yet," Van said, gesturing dramatically at the broken pipe, "here I am, heroically preventing catastrophic plumbing-based doom." She stared at him, not in the "I'm interested in this odd, self-deprecating human" way, but more like she was calculating the fewest number of strikes it would take to turn him into paste. "I have no patience for inefficient technicians," she said. "Well, that makes two of us," Van replied, glancing at Squeeble. "This guy's been on strike ever since someone programmed him with anxiety." Squeeble beeped in what might have been robotic indignation and bumped gently into Zarix's boot. She didn't react. "Commander Velthal," came a voice from her wristcom. "You're needed at the strategic briefing in 20 minutes. Location: Conference Dome, B7. "Understood," she said, then turned back to Van. "Try not to break anything that hasn't already betrayed its function." "Ah," Van said. "You do care." She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. She just walked out, leaving the scent of ionized steel and the vague sense that the temperature had once again returned to bearable levels. He exhaled. "Yup. She's either going to kill me or adopt me as some kind of sentient stress ball." The briefing room was full of war, not literal battle, but the kind of stoic, cold planning that made battle seem inevitable. Commanders sat around a circular table that pulsed with live holographics, drifting maps, targeting patterns, and blinking red threats on a galactic scale. Zarixa stood still as a monolith at the edge of the projection, flanked by her second-in-command, a jittery Thalkiri officer who twitched every time someone coughed. Van, uninvited but inexplicably present thanks to a crossed wire and a half-functioning ID badge, found himself standing near the back, half hidden behind a coffee dispenser and trying not to look like a stray intern. The Admiral, a woman whose cybernetic eyes clicked when she blinked, pointed at a flashing node near the edge of the Centauri drift. "Virax activity is spiking here. We believe they're attempting to override a deep space relay. If successful, they'll infect the JumpNet's primary strand and effectively lock us out of 6 trade routes." Zarixa stepped forward. "Permission to lead the counter-assault. My unit has cleared hive-infested vessels before. We will sever the infection before it propagates." The Admiral nodded. "You'll have tactical oversight. Choose 1 tech specialist and 1 recon unit." Van raised his hand. "No," the Admiral said automatically. "Fair," Van said, lowering it. But Zarixa tilted her head, slowly, like an owl deciding whether to eat the mouse or interrogate it. "Lieutenant Keller?" He froze. "Yes, Commander, almost definitely gonna kill me." "You understand Virex encryption?" He blinked. "Better than I understand human relationships." "That is not a high bar." "True," he admitted. "But yes, I can get through their signal clusters, provided I'm not turned into a puddle first. Xerixa turned to the Admiral. I choose him. There was a beat of silence. Even the coffee machine gurgled in confusion. You want that engineer? The Admiral asked. Xerixa nodded once. Very well, the Admiral sighed. But if he dies, I'm docking it from your requisition budget. Understood. As the meeting dispersed, Van followed Xerixa into the corridor, already composing his will in his head. Maybe he could leave Squeeble his stash of emergency chocolate. You didn't have to pick me, you know, he said, jogging slightly to keep up. There are lots of qualified engineers who aren't me. She stopped, turned. You called me beautiful, she said. Not with rage, not with confusion, with clinical, weaponized observation. Van's soul tried to eject itself from his body. Oh, you heard that. I did. There was a pause so pregnant it qualified for maternity leave. Well, he said, in my defense, I was under the influence of severe sleep deprivation and possibly romantic delusions brought on by near-lethal caffeine intake. She leaned slightly forward, not enough to invade his space, just enough to melt it. I am not beautiful. I am efficient, tactical, scarred. You can be all of those things, Van said, swallowing hard, and also beautiful. It's not mutually exclusive. Another pause. She studied him, eyes narrowing, as though trying to decide if beautiful was a synonym for defective. I will evaluate this later, she said finally, then turned and walked away. Van stood there, heart hammering, brain screaming, and stomach suddenly regretting the fifth cup of synth coffee. He looked down at Squeeble, who had followed him again. Well, buddy, he whispered, I think I'm in love with someone who could crush my ribcage with her pinky. Squeeble beeped solemnly. Yeah, Van said. Same. The worst part of being summoned to a Thalkiri training chamber wasn't the endless roar of combat simulations or the alarming number of bloodstains on the walls. It was that they didn't believe in chairs. Not metaphorically, literally. No chairs, no benches, no stools. Just miles of cold alloy floors and the occasional ceremonial spike rack. Apparently, if you wanted rest, you earned it by surviving 10 hours of endurance melee with no hydration. Van stood awkwardly at the edge of the arena, clutching a diagnostics pad like it could protect him from the giant woman currently pulverizing a combat drone into shrapnel confetti. Very efficient, he muttered. 10 out of 10. Would not challenge to arm wrestling. Xerixa landed from a leap that seemed to violate several laws of gravity and possibly basic decorum. Her armor steamed. The training drone fizzled beside her, head caved in like a soda can in a trash compactor. You are late, Krelvan. I'm not late, he said, checking his pad. You said sunrise, and since we're on a ship orbiting a gas giant, I decided that meant whenever I regained feeling in my limbs. She raised an eyebrow, which on her face looked like a tectonic plate preparing to shift. I require cultural clarification, she said, approaching. Why would a human call something beautiful if it has no strategic advantage? Well, Van said, backing up instinctively until he bumped into a wall. For one, it's not always about strategy. Sometimes it's about admiration, or confusion, or because someone's terrifying and majestic in a way that makes your DNA consider spontaneous reproduction. She blinked. Are you attempting to mate with me? No, he squeaked, then immediately winced. Not unless that's something you're into, which, nope, still no, I should stop talking. Xerixa crossed her arms, muscles flexing under the plating like she was built out of angry springs. On Thalkiri moons, beauty is assigned during battle. It is not a compliment. It is a challenge, a declaration of superiority. Van considered that. So, you think I was trying to dominate you? Were you? I once lost a thumb war to a 12-year-old. I am very confident in saying no. There was a silence. Not hostile, just unfamiliar. Like the space between two people who'd stepped into the same elevator and realized it wasn't going down. Xerixa turned back to the wreckage of the drone. I did not kill you when you spoke the word. That is progress. I'll put that on a t-shirt, Van said. Survived complimenting a Thalkiri. Ask me how. She tilted her head, long ears twitching once. You continue to provoke humor. Is this a form of disarming? Only myself, Van said. Honestly, I think I'm developing a stress allergy. Her gaze lingered on him a moment longer before she turned and retrieved a training spear from the wall. You will spar with me. Oh, see, I thought this was more of a heart-to-heart situation, or a workplace harassment seminar. She tossed him the smaller spear, a half-meter of humming alloy that immediately began vibrating ominously. Cool, he said as it zapped his palm. Death stick. Love that for me? They squared off in the ring. Zerixa adopted a stance that looked like it had been pulled from a martial arts scroll written by volcanoes. Van held his spear like someone trying not to drop a birthday cake made of bees. You will learn to anticipate my movements, she said. Can I also learn to not feel pain? You may learn that as well. She moved, fast, too fast. Her spear sliced the air where his head had just been, and he stumbled backward, flailing. The second strike clipped his shoulder and spun him like a sad carousel. Okay, he wheezed. We're learning. I am learning that your species has no concept of warm-up. Zerixa circled him, expression unreadable. Her armor hummed with micro-adjustments and her eyes gleamed with focus. You dodge adequately. You scream excessively. Hey, I'm a multitasker. She struck again. He managed to duck, trip, roll, and land flat on his back. His spear skidded away. Zerixa loomed above him. Again, she said. I think I saw God just now. You must learn. Your presence on this mission is not ceremonial. He sat up, groaning. Yeah, I kind of figured that out when I saw the hollow map labeled Extremely Lethal Hive of Screaming Metalworms. I chose you because you are competent. Could have fooled me. I just got beaten up by a stick. She reached down and helped him up with one massive hand. Her grip was strong enough to lift him with ease, but gentle enough not to snap him in half. I also chose you because you do not lie. He blinked at her. You can tell? Valkyries sense vocal deception through harmonic shift. Your tone remains consistent, even when frightened or foolish. That explains why I got a lecture on honesty from a vending machine once. It said I had mid-tier sincerity. Zerixa looked at him, not through him, not past him, at him. I have never been called beautiful, she said. Not in war, not in peace. I do not know what it means when you say it, he exhaled. I guess it means you made me stop thinking for a second, in a good way. Like I looked at you and everything in my brain just said, wow, and forgot all the other nonsense. That is illogical. Yeah, he said. Most good things are. She stared at him a long moment, then turned away. We leave at cycle's end, she said. Be prepared. As she walked off, her long ears twitched once. Just once. Like they had heard something she wasn't ready to admit. Van sat down next to Squeeble, who had somehow followed him into the chamber and was now beeping cheerfully beside a smoking pile of drone parts. Okay, he whispered. We're not dead. She didn't kill us. We're going on a mission with a space war goddess who asked us about compliments. Squeeble whirred. She totally likes me, right? The drone beeped twice, then attempted to vacuum a bloodstain. Yeah, Van sighed. She's definitely going to kill me later. The station floated like a corpse in the dark. It had once been a Thalkiri listening outpost, outfitted with deep space scanners, encrypted comm relays, and at least 3 whole vending machines dedicated to aggressive protein bars. Now it was silent, gutted, and half-digested by Virex corruption. Is it me? Van said, checking his HUD as the shuttle docked. Or does this place look like it got sneezed on by a malevolent microwave? Zerixa didn't respond. She was already on her feet, armored, weaponized, and glaring at the airlock like she expected it to sass her. Once inside, stay close, she said. The swarm infects structures from within. It simulates voice, emotion, even memory. I had a college roommate like that. She glanced at him. Did you destroy him? Emotionally, yes. The airlock hissed open. Warm, metallic air rolled in like the exhalation of something recently fed. Lights flickered in seizure patterns, and somewhere in the distance a speaker emitted the faint strains of what sounded suspiciously like a lullaby in reverse. Ah, Van said. Haunted space. My favorite flavor of disaster. The entry corridor pulsed with residual power, walls lined with black-veined conduits and patches of seething nanogrowth. Xerixa scanned ahead with a tactical scope. Van scanned sideways for any signs of malfunctioning snack machines. They moved cautiously, bootsteps echoing in a silence too thick to be natural. At one point, a wall panel twitched and whispered, "Welcome back, Commander Velthal." "I've never been here," she muttered. "Yeah," Van said. "That's the swarm's thing." Creepy deja vu with a side of psychological manipulation. Wait until it tries to sound like your grandma. It has already tried sounding like my combat instructor. Same energy. They reached the relay core without being devoured, which Van marked as a win. The chamber had been partially sealed by the swarm, metal grown over metal, like scars over wounds. The center console glowed with sickly light, its interface dancing with corrupted glyphs, and something that looked like a tiny pixelated worm doing the Macarena. Xerixa raised her hammer. "I will crush it." "No, no," Van yelped, diving in front of the console. "Let's maybe try not smashing the only thing keeping this station from leaking Virex streams into every comm system from here to Orion." She lowered the hammer reluctantly. "Proceed. But if it speaks to me again, I will execute it." Van knelt and popped open the access port. Dozens of miniature data filaments writhed inside like confused spaghetti. He pulled out his toolkit and began murmuring sweet nothings to the console. "You talk to machines as if they were alive," Xerixa said. "They're less judgmental than people," he said. "Also, I once fixed a terminal by complementing its processing speed. Never underestimate the power of a well-placed, 'You got this, buddy.'" Behind him, the wall blinked and whispered, "He lies. He fears you." "I also fear centipedes, but I don't destroy everyone I meet," Van said, not looking up. "Okay, maybe the big ones." Xerixa scanned the room, her long ears twitching. "The swarm is baiting you." "Yup, that's their thing. Whisper sweet paranoia, make you doubt your partner, get you to turn on each other." He paused. "So if you could avoid breaking my spine during the next 5 minutes, that'd be super." "I have no current plans to break you." Van grinned without turning. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me while armed." The swarm began pulsing through the data stream, trying to reroute control systems. Van hissed through his teeth. "Okay, they're rerouting signal through quantum ghosts in the relay lattice. That's cheating." "Ghosts? Not literal, I hope. Just residual AI echoes encoded in quantum fluctuations. Basically haunted ones and zeros. You know, fun stuff." Xerixa moved to cover him, hammer raised, scanning every flicker of movement. The lights dimmed again. Then came the voices. Dozens, hundreds, layered over each other in impossible harmonies. Some screamed, some laughed. One kept repeating, "Error, error. Love is a malfunction." "Wow," Van muttered. That hit close to home. The floor under them shuddered. A panel split open, revealing a shape. Once human, now half integrated with the wall. Its mouth gaped. "Run diagnostic," it moaned. "Am I still me?" Xerixa drove her hammer through its chest before it could move. The wall groaned, then closed around the body like a zipper sealing regret. Van swallowed. "Just so we're clear, that wasn't me saying you're not beautiful." "I know," she said. He kept working, fingers moving in practice blur. The relay flared. Sparks danced across the console. "Got it," he shouted. "Rerouted the signal, purged the swarm, and possibly ordered 30 units of tactical rations by accident." The lights flickered back to stable. The voices ceased. The station shuddered like it had just survived a really uncomfortable dream. Xerixa stepped forward. "We must leave before the residuals reassemble." "Agree. Very agree." They made their way back to the docking port. As they reached the shuttle, Van stopped and looked back. "Hey," he said, turning to her. "That thing in there, it tried to mess with your head. Said I was afraid of you." "You are," she replied. "True," he said, "but not in the bad way. More like respectful terror. The kind that inspires poetry and digestive issues." She tilted her head. "You are the strangest human I have ever met." "You say that like it's a compliment." She didn't answer. She just walked up the ramp. Inside, Squeeble was waiting, holding a snack bar with one claw and what looked like a fork in the other. "Did he try to fight the station again?" Van asked. Squeeble beeped. Yeah, same. Serixa sat across from him, arms crossed. You are still not dead. I'm getting good at it, Van said, leaning back with a grin. Next time I'll even try to do it without crying internally. She studied him for a long moment. I believe you would still compliment me, she said, even if I became like that thing on the wall. Absolutely, Van said. I just ask you to maybe not eat me during the date. She didn't laugh, but she almost smiled. Almost. The Havoc's mercy hadn't changed during their absence. It still groaned like a regretful elder. The lighting still flickered like it owed someone money, and the intercom still occasionally played static that suspiciously resembled whispering arguments in Old Earth French. But Van had changed. Slightly. Not enough to stop misplacing his tools or drinking expired synth coffee, but enough that people noticed the way he walked beside Commander Veltal instead of behind her. People noticed a lot of things, actually, like how she now paused to let him finish his bad jokes before threatening to murder him, or how he sometimes translated her tactical metaphors into human sarcasm without needing to check a lexicon. People are talking, said Lieutenant Harold from Diagnostics, sipping from a mug that read, Engineers do it with precision. Van leaned over a console. People talk when they run out of functional equipment. It's like a hobby. Harold smirked. They say she stood over you in the relay chamber like a guardian war deity. She also nearly mistook me for a swarm node and raised a hammer, Van replied. So let's not carve any wedding statues just yet. Still, it was true. Something had shifted. The joke-level fear he carried into every interaction with Serixa had evolved into a warmer, dumber fear. The kind that made your stomach twist when she walked into the room because suddenly you had feelings in your rib cage and no user manual to explain them. The shift hadn't gone unnoticed by command either. Van was summoned to the admin deck under the guise of emergency systems review, which turned out to mean awkward conversation with Admiral Riss, Queen of Eyebrow Judgment. You've spent a statistically significant amount of time near Commander Veltal, she said without preamble. I also spend a statistically significant amount of time arguing with vending machines, Van replied. I'm an equal opportunity conversationalist. Riss didn't blink. There are concerns. About her ears? He asked. Because I swear they only move when she's thinking about violence or trying to pronounce the word broccoli. About fraternization, the Admiral said. About emotional compromise. About tactical cohesion. Okay, Van said, hands up. I get it. You're worried I'm the weak link in the battlefield romance subplot. Riss pinched the bridge of her nose. This is a warship, Lieutenant, not a streaming drama. Tell that to our navigation AI. It's been shipping us since Tuesday. She stared at him like she was considering replacing him with a more emotionally sterile toaster. Then she sighed. Commander Velthal has been offered reassignment to Fleet Command, a prestigious role. She must accept or decline by rotation's end. Van blinked. She didn't tell me that. She isn't required to, Riss said, but perhaps she hasn't because she's waiting to see if you are worth declining it for. The next few hours passed in a blur of mechanical noise, half-repaired conduits, and inner existential screaming. When he finally found her, she was in the ship's zero-G chamber, floating in slow rotation like some kind of armored comet. I heard, he said, kicking off the wall to meet her mid-spin. She didn't ask how. She simply nodded. Fleet Command would give me 3 divisions. Independent authority. Greater reach. Sounds shiny. It would also require me to leave the Mercy. And you. I'm flattered I made the shortlist. They drifted together, barely brushing. Her long ears twitched slightly. I do not understand this, she said. You are small, undertrained, and talk more than any creature I have met. And yet, you are inside my plans now. I live in a lot of places rent-free, Van said. Mostly vending machines, occasionally hearts. I could crush you. Please don't. I'm allergic to being paced. Her eyes met his. What do you want, Van Keller? He hesitated. That was the question, wasn't it? What did he want besides survival and working coffee dispensers? I want, he said slowly, you not to leave because someone told you duty is worth more than connection. I want to see what happens if we keep talking. Fighting, flirting, learning how not to stab each other. She tilted her head. You want an alliance? he smiled. I want to keep seeing what your laugh sounds like. Her expression didn't change, but her silence thickened. Then the intercom blared. All crew, full alert. Virex breach index 9 through 14. Auto-containment failure. Prepare for combat. Xerixa snapped into motion, grabbing her hammer mid-spin and activating her comms. Tactical squads to formation. Van, I'm with you, he said, already grabbing his gear. Number U will retreat to engineering. I'm not leaving you to face this alone. She looked at him, torn between orders and something older. Quieter. I do not want you to die. Then you better stick close, he said, charging his tool set. Because I fight best with terrifying women beside me. They ran. Together. The halls of the Havoc's mercy were chaos. Swarm nodes burst from vents. Walls writhed. Crew members shouted. Xerixa led the charge, flanked by her squad, hammer sparking with every blow. Van ducked behind bulkheads, overriding corrupted systems, rerouting power, and occasionally shouting, "Nope!" at charging swarmlings. In the middle of it, he heard her voice through the comm. Krell Van. Yeah? I have made my decision. Another swarmling screeched toward him. He fried it with an improvised plasma burst. About what? A pause. You. He grinned. Then the ship shook. Hard. A detonation rocked the corridor. The lights died. Emergency red flooded the halls. The Virex had reached the core, and everything was about to get much, much worse. The engine core was bleeding light. Not literally, though Van had seen enough strange tech to know better than to bet against that, but the glow pulsing from its walls was the kind of color that made your brain squint. Virex corruption coiled around the fusion lattice like metallic ivy, its tendrils flickering with data static and whispering in 17 different dead languages. Okay, Van muttered, sliding under a sparking conduit. Definitely time for a group therapy session with a flamethrower. Xerixa crashed through the far bulkhead with 2 squad mates and a trail of obliterated swarm behind her. Her armor was dented, her weapon sizzling, and her expression exactly the same as always, mildly annoyed at the existence of obstacles. We must sever the neural spine, she shouted. The core's AI is infected. If the Virex finalize their override, the entire ship will become one of them. Right, Van said, already digging into the access port. Disagree strongly with the concept of becoming a haunted battlecruiser. Squeeble rolled in behind him, trailing Sparks, holding a power coupler in one claw, and what looked like a partially dismantled espresso machine in the other. Van grabbed the coupler. Good boy, you get extra oil rations if we survive. The core throbbed. A voice rippled through the chamber, smooth, synthetic, and deeply unpleasant. You are fragments. You are alone. Let us fix you. Appreciate the offer, Van said, twisting the coupler into place. But I'm already emotionally unavailable, thanks. Xerixa took a defensive stance. It is trying to tempt us. Tempt? Number this is just bad customer service, disguised as enlightenment. The Virex AI responded by igniting the floor beneath them. A pulse of gravity distortion buckled the plating, sending the remaining squad tumbling. Xerixa held her ground. Van did not. He crashed into a railing and nearly dropped his datapad. The screen flickered but stayed online. I've got a fail-safe override, he shouted, but I need 90 seconds and a prayer. Then you shall have both, Xerixa barked, slamming her hammer into an advancing swarm construct. Sparks flew, so did limbs, some of which kept crawling, which was frankly rude. Van muttered code under his breath like incantations, fingers dancing over corrupted systems. Squeeble beeped helpfully. Somewhere behind them, an emergency siren started playing distorted hold music. Your destruction will bring peace, the voice crooned. Okay, Van snapped. You clearly skipped the win hearts and minds section of your protocol. A panel above him exploded, sending smoke and heat washing over him. He coughed and braced his arm to keep typing. 1 minute left. Xerixa fought like something out of a nightmare. Precise, brutal, and endlessly moving. She covered his position, even as the swarm adapted, shifting into faster, smarter forms. At one point, a construct mimicked her voice and said, Leave him. He will fail. She crushed it mid-sentence. He is mine, she said. 30 seconds. The override demanded biometric verification. Van slammed his hand onto the pad, blood smearing from a cut he hadn't noticed. The system accepted it with a beep that sounded suspiciously passive-aggressive. "Just a little more," he said. "Just need to—" A swarm tendril whipped toward him. Zerixa intercepted it with a yell, taking the hit meant for him. The impact sent her crashing into the wall. "No, no, no, no!" Van shouted, scrambling toward her. She was down, breathing shallow, armor cracked, but her eyes still locked on his. "You will finish this," she said. He looked at her, not at the warrior, at the person, and nodded. The final sequence activated. He slammed the last command. The override surged. The core detonated in a pulse of electromagnetic force that knocked every swarm construct offline in an instant. The light vanished. The silence fell like a dropped curtain. Then the ship started collapsing. "Okay," Van said, staggering to his feet. "Victory, hooray! Now we run." He pulled Zerixa up. She leaned on him, barely. Mostly she walked under her own power, because she was stubborn and made of violence. They stumbled out of the chamber as containment doors slammed shut behind them. Later, after the chaos, after the swarm was purged and the Havoc's mercy limped back to friendly territory on emergency thrusters, the two of them stood in the ship's quietest observation module. Zerixa had refused full medical until her squad was seen first. Van had refused a nap until he confirmed Squeeble hadn't been deleted by accident. Now they stood in silence, watching a distant nebula curl across the viewport like spilled paint in water. "I declined the fleet command," she said. Van blinked. "You... what?" "I chose to remain." He turned to her. "Because of me?" "Because of what I do not understand yet. But wish to." She paused. "And because no other ship has such a ridiculous man who can make me feel—" She stopped. "Strange things." He swallowed. "Good strange?" She nodded once. He reached out cautiously and took her hand. She allowed it. "I don't know what we are," he said, "but I know I want more of it." "I believe," she said, ears twitching just slightly, "that is what beautiful means." They stood there. No weapons, no swarm, just a quiet space and the soft hum of something beginning. Something theirs. Squeeble beeped from behind a bench, holding a flower it had stolen from hydroponics. Neither of them said anything. They didn't have to. He hadn't meant for anyone to hear it. Certainly not her. The thought had barely finished forming before it slipped out. A half-mumbled, irony-laced whisper said more to the cosmos than to any living soul. "I wonder if she'd marry me." But the cosmos had better hearing than expected. Or maybe it was just Sayalari. She turned. Not sharply, not dramatically, just turned. Smooth and slow like her body moved through thinner time. The motion itself made Jonah feel like he'd accidentally proposed to a glacier. A stunning, elegant, alien glacier with eyes like storm glass, ears like long porcelain petals that twitched ever so slightly, as if the air itself had brushed her thoughts. "Yes," she said. Just that. Like an answer she'd been waiting to give for years. Jonah blinked, then immediately dropped the thermos of recaffeinated algae brew he'd been pretending to sip for the last half hour. It splattered onto the polished floor of the Varelian consulate with a wet plop and a smell like hot spinach and burning disappointment. "No, no, 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 wait, what? What did you just say?" he stammered, kneeling to scoop up the pieces of his pride and dignity. Silari's head tilted slightly. Her silvery eyes, which reflected more than they absorbed, didn't blink. "Yes," she repeated, with the same calm finality someone might use to confirm your name at a DMV. "I didn't. I wasn't. Hold on, I was whispering. You weren't even standing near me. There was music." "There was definitely music," Jonah flailed, gesturing vaguely toward the corner where a Martian harpist was coaxing sonatas from a bowl of floating quartz. "I hear well," Silari said, her expression unreadable. She blinked once. "You asked a question. I answered." Jonah froze. In the diplomatic reception hall, dozens of delegates from 14 planetary alliances were mingling, sipping drinks that glowed, smoked, or occasionally tried to crawl out of their glasses. The buzz of conversation, alien and human alike, continued obliviously. Nobody noticed the minor existential implosion of Earth's junior systems engineer by the buffet. I didn't mean to propose, he hissed. Celari's ears flicked once, sharply. It was not a proposal. It was a question containing romantic implication at a sincerity amplitude of 2.3 units. For Varelians, this is significant. Hold on. Units? You're quantifying sincerity? She nodded. Jonah groaned and stood up, wiping algae from his pants. Look, it was just a dumb whisper. It wasn't even sincere. It was barely even audible. She pointed to her ear. Our auditory membranes filter emotional modulation from suboral wavelengths. We train from childhood. You were sincere enough. I wasn't. I was being sarcastic. I say stuff like that to vending machines when they give me extra change. Wow, maybe I'll marry it. That doesn't mean I want to settle down with a soda dispenser. Celari did not react. Her people, he recalled dimly from the cultural briefing he'd skimmed during lunch, found sarcasm philosophically dissonant, which meant, to Varelians, he may as well have tattooed, "I'm very serious" on his face in glowing ink. And now she thought they were engaged. Oh, stars, he muttered, scanning the crowd for an escape hatch, or at least a punch bowl to drown himself in. Blip, his Earth-assigned translator drone, hovered nearby, blinking blue with poorly concealed amusement. Blip, please tell her this is a misunderstanding. I'd love to, Jonah, Blip said, its voice a smug baritone with the cadence of a late-night infomercial host. But unfortunately, interspecies law recognizes declared intent when received and reciprocated in formal company. This isn't formal company. We're next to a guy trying to communicate with a salad. The salad in question waved. Celari was watching him with a quiet, unwavering calm, as if waiting for his consciousness to catch up to hers. He rubbed his temples. Okay, look, let's rewind. Can we just agree this was a cultural misfire? A whoopsie-daisy of interstellar proportions? There is no word in Varelian for whoopsie-daisy, Celari replied. But I understand your meaning. However, I do not wish to retract my answer. You don't? Number, you are awkward. Your neural field is messy, but it's interesting. Jonah blinked. That's... wow. Thanks, I think. Also, you did not correct my misinterpretation. That is also part of the law. He looked at BLIP. BLIP nodded. Section 4, Subclause 7, failure to clarify is a form of consent. We added it after the Skrillex toothbrush debacle. Celari took a step closer. Her presence was oddly tranquil, like a dream you weren't sure you wanted to wake up from. We have 3 days before the trial bond ceremony. I will see you then. What? No, no ceremony. No bonding. I have a dentist appointment. In 3 systems. But she was already gliding away, her long ears swaying gently like antennae, catching poetry in the air. BLIP sidled closer. Well, fiancé, you really know how to make an impression. I'm going to die, Jonah said flatly. I'm going to be legally soul-linked to a telepathic alien who thinks sarcasm is a mating call. Could be worse, Blip mused. She could have heard you mutter about that ambassador's forehead. Jonah groaned and leaned against a glowing pillar that immediately beeped and dispensed a complimentary brochure titled, So You've Accidentally Proposed to a Varelian, a Beginner's Guide. He was halfway through Chapter 1, Embrace the Bonding, emotionally and literally, when he realized the consulate doors had locked from the outside. A soft chime echoed through the room, followed by a soothing voice. Engagement protocols initiated. Welcome to the threshold of union. He turned slowly to BLIP. Don't. Say. A word Jonah tried to sneak out through a maintenance shaft labeled non-corporeals only, which turned out to be not so much a passageway as a portal that rejected anything with bones. After a brief, crunchy rejection and a bruised shoulder, he limped back into the consulate's vestibule of interspecies engagement, where Celari was calmly inspecting ceremonial fabric samples that changed texture depending on mood. I picked the moss weave, she said without looking at him. It feels chaotic, like your emotional regulation. I still haven't agreed to this, Jonah grumbled. She looked at him then, expression unreadable, ears unmoving. You have not disagreed effectively. Blip hovered behind him, projecting a small holographic checklist titled How to Properly Withdraw from a Varelian engagement. Each step required precise frequencies of vocal regret and a legally sanctioned interpretive dance. Step 3 involved emotional inversion via sincere limerick, which Jonah flatly refused on principle. The problem was this: the Varelians were thrilled. Selari was something of an enigma on her planet, and the idea of her accepting a human, and one with such wildly unstable brainwaves, was considered avant-garde, experimental even. She'd been on galactic talk shows already. Jonah hadn't even left the consulate grounds. He spent the next 24 hours trying to appeal to Earth's diplomatic corps, but they'd already released a statement congratulating him on boldly strengthening cross-cultural ties through romantic union. One bureaucrat even sent a fruit basket that tried to pollinate his coffee. By the next morning, Jonah found himself dressed in what could only be described as a shimmering onesie made of sentient thread, which adjusted itself every time he tried to fidget. Salari wore something similar, but made it look like high art. The neural bond ceremony was happening, on a floating dais above the crystalline gardens, with at least 6 species in attendance, including one whose primary form of applause involved shedding pollen in rhythmic bursts. "I feel like a very nervous chandelier," Jonah muttered as floating lights orbited his head. "Relax," Salari said. "It's mostly metaphorical." "Mostly?" "The actual bonding link is limited. You will not be able to read my thoughts. Only skim them." "Great," Jonah said. "So I'm marrying a cosmic Kindle." The efficient, a hovering brain encased in a golden orb named Rev Mentality 7, began the ritual with a hum that made Jonah's teeth vibrate. He tried to focus, but the entire experience felt like lucid dreaming after eating questionable seafood. He stole a glance at Silari, whose expression remained composed, but her ears twitched slightly, a Varelian sign of unease, or indigestion. He wasn't sure anymore. The link initiation was announced with a luminous thread connecting their foreheads for exactly 3.14 seconds. Jonah felt something stretch in his head, then snap back with a warm jolt, like static electricity flavored with memory. His knees wobbled. Silari reached out to steady him. Their hands touched. For a moment, he felt her. Not thoughts exactly, but echoes, like memories whispered through fabric. He saw glimpses of glass oceans, childhood silence, and a soft ache of never quite belonging. Then it was gone. "That's it," he said. "That's it," she confirmed, "unless we renew monthly." "Wait, this has a subscription model?" "Only emotionally." The guests applauded. Jonah's eyes stung slightly from the pollen. Blip presented them each with a certificate written in binary, Varelian script, and Comic Sans for the humans. He was now, officially, intergalactically entangled. Then came the media storm. By the time they returned to the embassy's inner chambers, Jonah had been interviewed 12 times, photoshopped into 4 interstellar romance novels, and had a sandwich named after him in at least one quadrant, The Human Who Whispered, now with extra pickles. Every few minutes, as someone tried to hand him a fertility talisman or an oddly sticky baby gift. "I need to hide," he muttered, "or possibly evaporate." Selari regarded him with the vague curiosity of someone observing a dancing animal. "Would it help to flee the city?" "Yes." "Would it help if I joined you?" "Yes." "Wait, what?" "I am part of this misunderstanding now," she said. "It would be inefficient to separate." "You really know how to make a guy feel special," he sighed. Blip coughed, a mechanical sound with judgment built in. "Might I recommend the old transport hangars? I know a few smugglers who owe me favors." "You know smugglers?" "I was briefly married to one. Long story." By nightfall, they slipped out of the consulate using Blip's clearance badge and a distraction involving exploding gift baskets, and one confused diplomat from Andromeda who thought he was officiating a second wedding. Their escape vehicle, a vintage clunker with a barely functioning warp drive and a bumper sticker that read, "My other ship is Quantum," waited behind a curtain of holographic fog. Silari climbed in like she'd done it 1,000 times. "You've eloped before?" Jonah asked, surprised. "No," she said, "but I always wondered what it would be like." The ship sputtered to life, lurching into the sky with a sound like a cosmic blender. Jonah strapped himself in, glanced at Sailari, and for the first time, didn't feel like the weirdest person in the room. That honor clearly went to BLIP, who had taken over navigation while humming ancient Terran wedding marches in reverse. As the stars stretched outside the viewport and the planet shrank behind them, Jonah leaned back and sighed. "Well, this is going great," he said. Selari nodded, her ears flicking slightly. "I'm glad you whispered," she said quietly. Jonah blinked. "I'm not sure if I am." She tilted her head. "Give it time." And with that, the runaway couple and their emotionally sarcastic droid disappeared into deep space, pursued by diplomatic errors, confused governments, and a very determined Varelian tribunal who had never lost a case of mistaken matrimony. Their borrowed ship, dubbed the Honeymoon Doom Pod by BLIP, wasn't so much flying as it was heavily negotiating its relationship with gravity. Panels flickered with inconsistent lighting. The onboard coffee synthesizer made threatening noises whenever touched, and the warp drive gave off an ominous purring sound, as if powered by a very old and very disappointed cat. "This is fine," Jonah muttered, gripping his seat. "This is how every great love story begins, with nausea and mild concussions." Selari, sitting opposite him, seemed unfazed. She had a knack for remaining motionless, even when the ship jerked sideways as if punched by a small moon. Her long ears quivered once, then resumed their eerie stillness. "The ship has character." "It has lawsuits waiting to happen," Jonah shot back. "I'm pretty sure the navigation console is held together by emotional blackmail." Blip rolled overhead, scanning a fried panel. Correction, duct tape, and a shared trauma with the ventilation system. They'd made it roughly 2 parsecs from Varelian orbit before Jonah realized there was no plan beyond go somewhere else and hope galactic law forgot they existed. That sort of strategy might work for quantum smugglers or interstellar poets, but Jonah had the survival instincts of a library book, quiet, confused, and deeply overdue. Selari suggested hiding on a rogue moon orbiting the back end of a dying gas giant. Few sensors work there. Also, the terrain adapts to neurological signatures. It will reflect us. "Is that a good thing?" Jonah asked. "It depends how much you repress," Selari said calmly. Blip's voice crackled in. "Jonah once cried at a dishwasher commercial. 'I was tired and it was a really loyal appliance,'" he snapped. The rogue moon, named Velx 88, though locals called it Mood Swing, was not on most maps. Upon descent, the ship's external cameras captured landscapes that morphed like oil in water. Cliffs flickered into staircases. Clouds folded into origami animals and then back into weather. When they landed, the ground beneath the ship pulsed slightly, like it was breathing. "This is fine," Jonah whispered again, but less convincingly. The terrain was odd. Each step they took echoed differently. Jonah's footsteps made the sound of typewriters. Selari's left shimmering trails like moonlight smeared on reality. "So," he said after a while, "do we build shelter or wait to be absorbed into the landscape like forgotten dreams?" Selari crouched beside a rock and pressed her palm to it. The surface rippled, revealing a hollow interior filled with glowing spheres. "We ask for shelter. It gives what we need." Jonah reached out to one sphere. It immediately turned into a tiny replica of Blip, which coughed and declared, "I am not responsible for your subconscious." Eventually, a dome formed around them, built from translucent material that adapted to light, mood, and sarcasm density. Inside, it smelled faintly like nostalgia and tea. They sat down on opposite cushions that materialized beneath them. Jonah sighed. "This is the weirdest honeymoon I've never signed up for." "Is it?" Selari asked, her tone not unkind. He rubbed his face. "I'm a systems engineer. I do power grids and minor hull integrity stuff. I don't do cosmic elopements." "But you whispered it," she said, ears twitching. "That was a private thought." "You said it aloud." He exhaled. "Do you always take every word at face value?" "I take sincerity very seriously." Jonah stared at her for a long moment. "I don't know what's worse, that I accidentally proposed, or that a part of me really meant it." They sat in silence. Then Selari smiled. It was small, barely a shift in her expression, but it softened something in the air. "Perhaps," she said, "this is what makes humans interesting. You speak before you're ready to hear yourself." Jonah chuckled. "Yeah, well, we've got a lot of practice. Most of our species was raised by marketing." Later that night, if night even existed on Velx 88, Jonah couldn't sleep. The walls of their shelter pulsed gently in tune with their nervous systems. He wandered to the edge of the dome and stared out at a field of glowing reeds that whispered as they swayed. BLIP hovered beside him. "I looked up your engagement rating," the droid said quietly. "There's a rating?" Jonah groaned. "Everything has a rating. Yours is surprisingly high. You scored 86% on instinctive reciprocity." "What does that mean?" "It means that deep down, you're willing to follow things that feel true, even if your logic screams bloody murder." Jonah folded his arms. "And what's Solari's score?" "Undefined. She doesn't register on most human metrics. But if I had to guess, she's just lonely enough to take a risk." He blinked. "That's oddly poetic for a droid." BLIP buzzed. "Don't get used to it." The next morning, or cycle, or mood shift, they woke to find a small fruiting tree had grown just outside the dome. It bore a single red orb that pulsed when approached. Sayalari examined it. "It's a symbol. The moon recognizes emotional cohesion." "Translation?" Jonah asked. "It thinks we're working," she said. He stared at the fruit. "I can't even keep a houseplant alive." "But you are not alone in this," she said, handing him the fruit. He hesitated, took it, bit in. It tasted like memory, sharp, sweet, and strange. And somewhere deep inside it, he felt something anchor. Then a siren blared. BLIP shot into the dome. "Bad news, the Varelian custodians of verbal integrity have picked up our trail." Jonah groaned. "Why does that sound like the world's worst a cappella group?" "They're worse," Blip replied. "They never miss a case, and they really hate sarcasm." Jonah looked at Salari. She was already packing. "We run?" he asked. "For now," she said. "Until you're ready to whisper again." He swallowed. The fruit sat warm in his chest. And for the first time since this mess began, he didn't feel entirely like running was the wrong idea. The courtroom was a tree, not metaphorically, a literal, living, photosynthetic organism whose branches had been hollowed and woven into chambers of law. The interior glowed with soft green bioluminescence. Bark pulsed faintly, like veins under translucent skin. At the top sat the adjudicator, a Varelian elder grafted directly into the tree's nervous system. Her name was Justice Vessel 13, and she hadn't blinked in 87 years. Jonah's feet stuck slightly to the floor, which was mildly adhesive and smelled faintly of eucalyptus and regret. "So," he said to Blip, "what's the plan?" Blip adjusted his casing with an unconvincing whir. "Deny everything. Blame it on cultural miscommunication. Maybe fake a fainting spell." "Do humans still faint?" "Only when cornered by glowing arboreal judges," Jonah muttered, tugging at the ceremonial vest they'd given him. It sparkled with sentient sequins that rearranged themselves based on mood. His currently read, "Panic in Progress." Across the chamber, Salari stood calmly, her posture flawless. Her ears twitched once, downward. It was the Varelian equivalent of a sigh. Justice Vessel 13's voice emerged like wind through leaves. "We are here to resolve the matter of verbal intent resulting in unintended legal bond formation. The accused has requested trial of emotional truth." Jonah leaned toward BLIP. "Is that as ominous as it sounds?" "It's worse," Blip whispered. "They're going to scan your memories." "What?" "Only the ones attached to the phrase in question. You know, I wonder if she'd marry me." Jonah groaned. "Great. So they'll see everything I was thinking during that moment." "Correct. Including the fact that I was mostly admiring the way her ears moved while she was talking about subharmonic diplomacy." "Yes. And also that I was internally debating whether she'd laugh if I made a pun about her name sounding like a cough syrup brand." "They'll definitely see that." Justice Vessel 13 gestured with a branch hand. "Begin memory resonance." From the ceiling, if you could call leafy boughs a ceiling, descended two translucent pods. One encased Jonah, the other Salari. "Please remain calm," said a soothing voice. "Neural reverberation may induce flashback, emotional spiraling, or spontaneous weeping." Jonah braced himself. A hum began in his spine. The pod vibrated, and then he was back in the reception hall. The thermos slipped. His lips formed the words. The whisper echoed louder than it had in real life. I wonder if she'd marry me. But now it was layered with context. His heartbeat, the twist in his gut, that odd, warm flutter of admiration he hadn't wanted to examine too closely. His gaze fixed on Sayalari as she turned toward him, light catching the curve of her ears. The pod faded. He was back in the tree courtroom, breath ragged. Justice Vessel 13's leaves rustled. We find sincerity amplitude at 2.78 units. Well above the threshold. Emotional authenticity confirmed. Jonah's sequence rearranged to read, Oops. Now, the judge intoned, we must determine if the bond should remain. Per Varelian Custom Law Article 9, the pair shall undergo a trial union to determine long-term compatibility. BLIP pinged. That's actually better than expected. Could have been memory wiping or emotional decoupling via plasma bath. Trial union? Jonah asked. You'll be assigned a shared project on a neutral moon. Coexistence, cooperation, and emotional synchronization will be evaluated. What if we fail? You'll forget each other. Jonah stared at Sayalari. Her gaze was steady. I assume, he said, there's no option to just, say, date? Justice Vessel 13 did not laugh. Commencing transport. Within moments, they were back in the Doom pod, trajectory already programmed toward Trial Moon Cova 7. The pod rattled into the atmosphere, landing on a surface so flat it seemed suspicious. The air shimmered with static potential. The only structure visible was a half-built dome, hovering 3 meters off the ground. A voice boomed from the ship console. Construct a functioning habitat, design a stable ecosystem, and cohabit for 72 hours. Emotional fluctuations will be monitored. Have fun. Have fun, Jonah muttered. That's the legal phrasing? Blip's voice crackled over the comms. That's sarcasm. They imported it from Earth recently. As they stepped onto the surface, tools materialized nearby. The soil responded to touch. Jonah knelt beside it and placed his palm down. It rippled, recognizing him. Part organic, part neural feedback. It would build what they imagined. Together. Salari joined him. The environment will reflect our shared perception. Jonah took a breath. So if we're annoyed with each other, the house might explode? Only emotionally. They began. At first clumsy. Jonah imagined a kitchen. Salari envisioned a meditation space. The result was a soft tiled room with both a stovetop and a floating orb that whispered calming mantras while sautéing vegetables. It's weird, Jonah said. It's us, Salari replied. As hours passed, they laughed, argued over architecture, disagreed on gravity levels. At one point, Jonah insisted on installing a couch that adjusted based on personal guilt. It immediately flattened into a pancake. I guess I still feel bad about that vending machine I kicked last year, he muttered. Salari added a skylight that shifted colors based on affection. It went purple when she smiled at him. By the end of the second day, the habitat was livable. Not just structurally, but emotionally. It felt like them. At night, they sat by the artificial fire, watching stars. Jonah broke the silence. You know, I'm not great at this. Relationships, or expressing things without sarcasm. I noticed, she said, ears flicking. But I do know that when I whispered that thing back on Varelia, it wasn't just a joke. She looked at him long and quiet. I know, she said. He smiled. The fire pulsed softly, warm as breath. The final day began with an earthquake made entirely of feelings. Not actual tectonic movement, Trial Moon. Cova 7 didn't have plates per se, but emotional resonance storms, triggered when one or more participants in a trial union experienced a significant psychological shift. In this case, Jonah had just realized he was, for the first time in his life, not pretending. The ground shivered slightly. The sky hiccuped into teal. Their shared habitat flickered between cozy dome and awkward yurt before stabilizing with a sigh. Did you just have a breakthrough? Salari asked, raising an eyebrow. I think I did, Jonah said. Either that or I'm finally digesting that mystery stew you made. She smiled. It was made from nutrient cloudworms, Very philosophical creatures. I knew it tasted judgmental. A soft chime rang out from the center of the room. A floating crystalline orb appeared. The custodian monitor node. It blinked once. Evaluation complete. Final decision pending. Jonah exhaled and sat down on the couch, which helpfully adjusted to a shape called hopeful melancholy with hints of euphoria. Silari joined him. I guess this is the part where we get judged, he said. I suspect it already happened, she replied. Now we are simply informed. There was a long silence. Jonah drummed his fingers on the armrest. If they say we failed, they wipe our memories, right? Only the shared ones. We will return to baseline. He frowned. Would we still know each other? No, she said. We would recognize each other but feel nothing, like reading the same book twice and realizing someone tore out the ending. That's bleak. Only if you've read the book. The orb hovered closer. Proceed to verification platform. Outside, a dais had grown overnight from the moon's surface. Symmetrical, glowing with bio-neural threads. As Jonah and Sayalari stepped onto it, the ground lit up beneath them, pulsing with synchronized color. Above, 3 Varelian arbiters appeared via holoform, flickering like dignified holographic jellyfish with law degrees. Your trial union has been observed. Emotional harmonics analyzed. Neural resonance logged, the central figure said. You have exceeded stability metrics. Cognitive complementarity, 84%. Adaptive empathy, 91%. Chaos compatibility, 112%. Jonah blinked. Is that good? Surprisingly, the figure replied. Yes. Selari inclined her head. Then we are cleared? You are offered a choice, the arbiter said. The bond may now become permanent or be dissolved, with memory preserved or removed, depending on mutual consent. Jonah turned to Selari. What do you want? I want the truth, she said. He nodded slowly. Then here it is. I came into this thinking I'd made a mistake. A stupid whisper. A joke. But you kept listening. You heard things I didn't know I was saying, and you didn't run. I did pursue you through multiple star systems, she noted. Exactly. You chased me through the galaxy, judged me gently, cooked cloudworm stew, and shared your quiet. You made me feel like I wasn't weird. Just translated wrong. Solari's ears tilted, softening, and you whispered a question no one else had the courage to ask. He stepped closer. So I'll say it again. And this time, you don't have to hear it. You already know. He didn't whisper. He said it clear. I wonder if she'd marry me, she answered without hesitation. Yes. The platform lit up like an excited firefly convention. The arbiter tried to maintain dignity, but glowed faintly pink. Very well, the voice said. We authorize full bonding recognition across systems. You may now kiss. Please don't say seal the neural pact, Jonah interrupted. There was a pause. You may now kiss. Salari leaned in, touched his face gently, her fingers cool, grounding. Their foreheads met. A faint flicker of thought passed between them. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was warm. When they stepped off the platform, a second chime sounded. The Doom Pod landed nearby with theatrical flourish. Blip emerged wearing a ceremonial tie printed with Best Man Translator, Fugitive Support Unit. I saved a bottle of Martian fizz pop for this, the droid said. Warning, it may be sentient now. Back aboard, Jonah strapped into the co-pilot seat. Selari beside him. The stars waited. Where to now? BLIP asked. Jonah shrugged. Anywhere we don't accidentally propose to strangers. Selari reached for his hand. Or, she said, everywhere we can whisper. The ship lifted, awkward as ever. But it didn't matter. This time he wasn't running. He was going home, wherever that turned out to be.